Welcome to another lesson on narrative writing. One of the easiest yet most powerful forms of writing is personal writing. If you're writing about something that has happened to you, you won't have to think up an exciting plot. You already know what happened. And when you write about it, your emotions and feelings will come through well, and the reader will be drawn into what you're saying. In this lesson, we'll try to show you how to become more successful and confident at personal narrative writing. By the end of this lesson, you should know what personal writing is and be familiar with techniques for improving your own personal writing. To begin with, what is personal writing? Personal writing is writing about an experience that you have had. It can take different forms, such as an essay, autobiography, or diary extract. Personal essays are often interesting and unique. No one else would have had quite the same experience as you or have had exactly the same emotional response. Now you may think that you haven't experienced anything worth writing about, but you'd be wrong. Describing a fight that you had with your mother or how you felt when you won a sporting event could be the basis of an excellent personal essay. Once you've decided what to write about, here are some pointers to get you going. First, you need to trigger your memory. Ask yourself the following questions to help trigger your memory. What was the best part of the experience? What was the worst part of the experience? How did the experience make me feel? What words come to mind when you think about the experience? And can you recall any sounds, smells, and tastes associated with the experience? Once you've triggered your memory, you'll also have to allow your emotions to come through. Write about a topic that really means something to you. If you are angry, passionate, thrilled, or confused, this will show through in your writing. If you've given a topic a lot of thought, it will seem well planned. The next thing you want to do is be honest and realistic. If you are writing a story, be as realistic as possible. Write honestly about your feelings and give details so that the audience knows exactly what has happened and they become involved. It's important to set the scene. If you're writing something personal, you may have to give some background information. When giving details, it's important that you balance the amount of detail. Although you should leave out boring or trivial details that would make your story dull, it's important to explain your feelings and emotions so vividly that the reader would know exactly how you felt. To keep the body of your narrative interesting, it's important to write vividly. Here are some pointers to show you how to make your writing vivid. Think carefully about word choice. Try to find just the right nouns or verbs you need and back these up with adjectives and adverbs. Try to increase your vocabulary. Use a thesaurus to replace boring words with more lively ones. A thesaurus is a book that is similar to a dictionary, but instead of giving definitions, it provides various synonyms for words. Include some direct speech. Write down the person's actual words. Ask some questions. Even though these may be rhetorical, in other words, you don't expect an answer, These will show what you have been thinking about. Use some figures of speech, such as similes and metaphors. Sometimes comparing your experience to other things will help it to seem clearer. In the previous lesson, we discussed the importance of effective introductions and conclusions, and this is an important part of your personal narrative writing. Your introduction should grab the reader's attention, for example, by including a flashback or some direct speech. Your story could end in such a way that the conflict is resolved, it reaches a climax, or you can leave your reader hanging if the problem is ongoing. This may sound like a lot of difficult detail, but it's not. Let's have a quick recap of some of the pointers we've just gone through. When writing a personal narrative, trigger your memory by asking yourself questions about the event. Allow your emotion to come through. Be honest and realistic. Set the scene. Balance the amount of detail. Write vividly and consider your introduction and conclusion. Okay, now let's have a look at an example of a personal narrative written by a teenager, Lee Turner, that incorporates some of the techniques we've just talked about. I'm sure many of you would have had similar experiences that you could write about. Notice how vividly she writes and draws the reader in. Hello? It was about 10 o'clock on a beautiful July morning, and I had just been woken up from a deep slumber by the untimely ring of the telephone. Little did I know that my destiny was on the other end of the line. Starting with a sound effect immediately gets the reader's attention, as does direct speech. Here, Lee is able to turn an ordinary event, being woken up by the telephone, into something special, the start of her destiny. This would intrigue the reader, who would want to know more about the call. "Is Lee there?" the rich tenor voice asked. "Yeah, this is..." I sat bolt upright, smacking my head on the headboard in the process. I rubbed my forehead and stared in disbelief at the receiver in my hand. Notice Lee's use of description and details. Although she does not describe the caller, by describing his voice, we are able to deduce that this is a special person in her life. Her reaction to the situation, banging her head, highlights her disbelief. She continues by describing who the caller is. "I met Josh while we worked together at the same pizza parlor. It was love at first sight for me. Never mind that Josh didn't know my name, or so I thought until this fateful phone call proved otherwise." Up till now, she has only described the call. Now she gives some background information. If she had given this information at the start of the story, it would have lost some of its effect. Here she has described how she feels about Josh, and in an amusing way, how she thought he felt about her. "I was 100% head over heels for the guy who was at this very moment on the other end of my telephone calling my name." Lee now continues to talk about the nature of the phone call. Because she is so honest about her feelings and emotions, it is easy for the reader to see the significance of this event in her life. This is the sort of event that many teenagers would have experienced and would be able to write about. Do you see how a normal everyday event can become an interesting piece of writing if it is well written? Now let's consider how it is possible to describe an event that happened long ago, but reflect on what it means to you now by using some of the techniques that we've discussed in this lesson. We are going to examine an extract from an article called Exorcising the Demon of Self-Hate, written by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. In it, he narrates an event that he was involved in and also gives his personal reflection about how he felt about it. This is how the article begins. In 1972, I visited Nigeria for the first time. My heart thrilled with pride as we took off in a Nigeria Airways plane on a domestic flight. In this opening paragraph, Tutu sets the scene by giving the time and place. He doesn't bog the reader down with details, but gives enough background information for the rest of the passage to make sense. He continues like this. I grew inches because the pilots were black like me. I had never in my life before flown in a plane piloted by blacks. The takeoff was smooth. It was exhilarating stuff, and then we hit turbulence when the plane would descend suddenly, bobbing all over the place. You left your stomach somewhere up there. Here, Tutu describes what happened and how it made him feel. Balancing recounting the action and including your reflections are an important part of narrative writing. Notice how he paints word pictures by using figures of speech. For example, he didn't literally grow inches, but this metaphor shows how proud he felt. The passage continues. I was devastated to discover that my worries about landing safely were exacerbated by the realization that there was no white person in the cockpit. I found myself unbelievably wondering if these blacks could make it without the omnipotent white person. Here the mood changes as he reflects on the seriousness of his realization. It was bad enough that he was worried about his safety on the plane, but worse still, he was horrified that as a black man, he was concerned that there was no white man in the cockpit during the turbulence. He goes on. I had not known until that moment just how conditioned I had been, how brainwashed, and how, unbeknown to me, I had internalized the white person's definition of who I was. In this paragraph, Tutu reflects on the event. Decades have passed since he was in the plane, and now he is able to look back and consider how he felt and what his experience was, and he realizes the importance of it. The simple action of going on a plane to Nigeria is through his reflection given the importance of a defining moment in which he realizes the impact that living under apartheid has had on him. Maybe something similar has happened to you, and you can write about it in today's lesson task. Consider the following questions. Have you ever been in a situation where you questioned someone's ability because of his or her being a certain sex, age, or color? Have you ever been judged by someone not on the basis of who you are and what you have done, but because of how you look, what race, religion, age, or sex you are, or where you come from? Think about these questions carefully. If you can recall the details, set the scene, describe your emotions, and reflect on the event. You could be well on your way to writing a vivid piece of personal narrative. As your task, write a page in which you describe what happened and how it made you feel. Well, that's the end of this lesson on personal narratives. See you next time.